So how did Mick Cronin say it? The Reds wanted free agents. They just all went to the Dodgers. So are the UCLA Bruins the Dodgers of the NIL game?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. So thanks for tuning in. Download an account. Get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So it's no secret that UCLA went from an absolute dud in the transfer portal recruiting game because they went all international in the class of 24, or excuse me, the class of 23. A lot of newcomers, a lot of new faces, fresh off a team that pretty much brought the UCLA program back to prominence, maybe not prominence, but in the national limelight under Mick Cronin, making a Final Four, a couple of Sweet 16s. Then you got Jaime Jaquez Jr. go to the NBA first round. We'll talk more about those Bruins in the NBA later, but you're wondering what happened to UCLA after that. Well, as we saw, under 500, an under or maybe overachieving team, depending on what your thoughts are. If you're positive, then you might say they're an underachieving team. If you're negative, you would have said this team outdid expectations. They're terrible from the start. Whatever it is, UCLA went out. Mick Cronin repeatedly throughout the season told his players, we need to be better. We didn't get a good NIL funding. We didn't get a good backing. And when players decided between UCLA or Kansas or Duke, this isn't his quote specifically, but that was the point he was making. When they're choosing between UCLA and other schools, they would almost always choose the other schools. Now, Mick Cronin could pitch. He can recruit. He's going to tell you, I will be as tenacious and get you as good of a defender and make you a better player, probably, if you can point to the Hawkinses of the world, see how Jalen Clark developed. I can get you better, but you got to want to commit to play, to fight, to earn your time to come here. Well, UCLA didn't win a lot of recruiting battles that way when they wanted to get better immediately in this portal game, which you have to do. You see UConn doing it. You see a lot of schools doing it. You saw Kentucky lose an entire roster. You saw Arkansas get a new roster. All these different teams across the country, they can get new rosters or a top-tier player or two that puts them over the hump to get deeper in the tournament or play better in conference. Or as UConn has done, they have made it to the NCAA pinnacle, championship-wise, back-to-back years. And UCLA just has not done so, but they have hit some home runs in the portal. UCLA stole Ju Zhang, and he was a big player for a couple of years. So UCLA's found ways, got some decent leadership on last year's team via the portal, but they couldn't compete with the rest of the team. Now, you look to this year, and all of a sudden, this team has become, as I've said repeatedly, a top-tier contender, 10, 15. And we can all debate as to who the better players are, but guys currently on scholarship that were starting and decent top recruits as freshmen are going to lose spots. They're going to lose spots in playing time to guys who are going to average close to 70-ish plus points per game coming in with the Bilodeaus, the Sky Clarks, the Kobe Johnsons of the world, daily. Dominic Harris when he finally gets to UCLA after finishing up classes at LMU. And whoever else I forgot, right? Daly and William Kyle. That doesn't even include convincing two freshmen to come on top of the rest of the players to leave. How do you do that? You do that by becoming NIL friendly. And now if you look at UCLA, you probably would have seen, all right, back in April, they're nominated for Best Institutional NIL Program. That was back in April earlier this year. That's not the same thing as an NIL program that gets players in the portal. So being institutionally great didn't mean that they were getting guys in the portal. Now, all of a sudden, years later or months later, after Cronin was telling the media, everybody, we couldn't get guys. He was telling Ben Bolt to the LA Times, we're the Dodgers now, or we're doing all these things. No, but the NIL budget got significantly better. Even look at football. UCLA won an NIL battle against Texas, trying to keep Jay Tuia, one of their top returning defensive linemen, basically, with any experience and any solid playing time in recent years under the UCLA football program, and he stayed. So overall, donors and support has grown for football under Deshaun Foster. That's a given. We've already talked about that. Now, Mick Cronin said, all right, we're going to go get new starters, new players. So this team is going to generate much more talent. Sky Clark literally signed an NIL deal, posted that he's going with Kendrick Perkins, an NIL deal. UCLA, once again, has more players than scholarship spots. And that doesn't even include a preferred walk-on coming in. So a preferred walk-on, a bunch of newcomers, 8 of them, and a guy completely funded coming to UCLA as an NIL player, name, image, likeness player. That doesn't even mean he's on scholarship. He's getting it all funded by somebody. Pretty sure it's Sky Clark or whoever it might be, but Clark signed specifically, publicly with Kendrick Perkins, NIL. A complete spot funded for UCLA when they couldn't even convince a guy in the portal. I bet you UCLA was probably looking and kind of putting out feelers, right, to Hunter Dickinson when he was in the portal. Not that that was ever really close, not that there's any confirmation there, and it's a long ways back in the past, but you think about that, who was one of the top transfer guys? It was him. That was a couple of seasons ago. That was in that class of 23. He went to Kansas. Now he's a 2-year player. Look at all the transfers UCLA got. They almost all have eligibility beyond just Kobe Johnson, who I think is going to immediately be a top-tier option for UCLA. Not necessarily scoring, but just to be there and do almost everything for UCLA. To leapfrog Lazar Stefanovic in terms of maybe minutes, leadership roles, or combined with that. That's not to say anything about either guy, but every player has more time that just came in the portal this season and came to UCLA. They went from, okay, decent to arguably top 15, top 10 class in the transfer portal recruiting game, depending on the recruiting rankings you use. And they're bringing on guys who started all at their other schools or were 5th or 6th in their team in minutes and played as a 6th man like Daly is. Versatility, scoring, shooting, mismatches, and he's bringing in new guys. Remember, Mick Cronin can also get pretty much as many coaches as he wants now. So he's even brought in a new coach to help give Adai Mara some new and improved conditioning to get him more muscle, more agility. And that's all from this LA Times article written by Ben Bolch. But still, it begs the question, wow, UCLA went from 0 to hero in no time. And yes, they're running and they're trying to come back and fight to get in this NIL game. And remember, they're still probably ways behind like a Kentucky or a Duke or a Kansas. But now they can compete and convince, hey, you're going to go there. We got spots here. And Mick Cronin made it happen. And he was able to convince his players, at least 2 or 3 of them, hey, this is what's going to happen. You probably might have to leave. No. The only guys who left were guys who did not get a lot of playing time, or probably the biggest name that left last year's team was Bedeke in terms of the most playing time throughout the UCLA season last year, other than Adembona going to the NBA draft. One more, that's self-explanatory. So now UCLA goes from significant growth in the NIL game. Now, they had the institutional award of being one of the best programs in the country, but now you've got a team that's going to be there this whole summer. You've got competition at basically every spot, regardless of what I think, what you think. It's going to be competition every spot trying to earn their minutes. And I do have a hunch as to who might play. There will be guys who might be buried on the depth chart that were Mick Cronin's first starting options last year. But to completely fund a spot by NIL, to go get these players, and all of a sudden, hey, it's not like they're throwing $1 million around like Mick Cronin was saying in this article in the LA Times, but they're competing now. They are competing with the best in the country, and that led to a top-tier class between perimeter defending, defensive player of the year is another league. You've got number 3 in the country shooting when you got Dominic Harris from downtown, and you got a bunch of new starting options. That's what Mick Cronin brought to this team. A complete turnaround from where they were, from him barking, him wearing Men of Westwood shirts around campus, the complete opposite of what Chip Kelly was doing. And look how much it changed. Look how much it changed. Chip Kelly wouldn't dare speak of it other than to say you can't directly pay your players. Well, That day and age is now coming. Now you have Mick Cronin, who was a practical billboard, said you got to be a billboard for your team, for your program. And look at the support it's brought him in last year. He asked for the support. He got it. And if he demands this much in his players, I believe they're going to be just as good this year. Now we got to demand more of the fans, because I was reading up on a CBS Sports article about stadium atmospheres, rankings, maybe not the same thing, but UCLA didn't fare too well. The Big Ten haterade has already started for UCLA. Let's talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It's summertime, and one of my favorite things is to go watch baseball games. So you're going to want to do that by going to Gametime. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat. And if you're trying to go watch a game at like Wrigley Fields or Fenway Park or any baseball field for that matter in the major leagues, you want to make sure you're not sitting behind the foul pole, have terrible viewing. Maybe you're not one of those people that wants to sit at the edge of the aisle and have people walking up in front of you the entire game so you can't see. That's where you go to Gametime and you can see, all right, I'm looking at this seat. This is a perfect seat. Or you're going to go see, say for me, it would be like the Dodgers going to the Cubs in Chicago. They've already done that this year, but you want to go make a big legacy trip. And then next thing you know, you're stuck behind a pole. I've been there. But with Gametime, you wouldn't have to be there. Or you would know what to do when you're in the stadium and you're like, oh, I already know what's going to happen. And you're not going to be surprised whether you're behind a pole or it's some last minute fees, because you put in the toggle, you show the feature, you know what you're going to pay before it shows you got to pay. You know what you're going to pay. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Cruising on in this second segment of Locked On UCLA, stumbled across, a recent article discussing what UCLA looks like in the stadium rankings. I was wondering, what are we going to discuss today? And I saw, all right, the Rose Bowl in certain articles, they're ranked 1, 2 in the stadium game for UCLA. Of course, all the Big Ten fans love it for the Rose Bowl game, so they've seen it packed out. Then I stumbled across an article where it was written about stadium rankings a lot with the new Big Ten teams, with the old Big Ten teams, 18 teams in 2024. And Tom Fornelli said, you know what? I am going to bring the haterade already. Well, a lot of it is warranted and somewhat very true with what he had to say, based on stadium rankings, more on the atmosphere in the Big Ten. Where did UCLA fall in 18 teams? Do I agree? Do I disagree? Well, they say the Coliseum is more hype. I don't think the Coliseum's been hyped in many, many years, regardless of what the fake Lincoln Riley hype is. But UCLA falls at 13 for the Rose Bowl. 13 out of 18 teams. Now, if you see if they're ahead of Northwestern, would make sense. Indiana, Maryland, Purdue, Rutgers. I would hope UCLA's atmosphere, even though sometimes it seems like there's only been a couple of ants in the Rose Bowl for some of those games in recent years under Chip Kelly to end the year. But we saw how hyped it was for the Colorado game. That is certainly upper tier for atmospheres in college football. When there's a packed Rose Bowl, an epic game, we know it can certainly bring out the best in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, in the greater Pasadena area, in the SGV. You know, when you're in the Valley, you're looking, it is one of the best atmospheres. What was funny is, all right, UCLA 13, and everybody's going to say, there's a difference between the Rose Bowl game and a difference between a mausoleum and the UCLA football crowd, right? You want me to say exactly what this article says? It can feel like a mausoleum during the regular season when the Bruins are struggling. Okay, I think just about nearly every place in the country is going to be empty if your team goes through a dud and sucks, all right? Now, for whatever it's worth, they have UCLA behind Illinois. Surprisingly, I didn't realize this, but Michigan State's rated in the lower half of Big Ten stadium atmospheres. Michigan State doesn't even crack the top 9 of 18 teams. Interesting. Of course, a lot of that has to do with recent success and whatever happened in their recent head coaching turnover. That has not been very helpful to them. But then you've got Nebraska, where UCLA had a lot of fun fairly recently in the last decade, they're only top 8. Camp Randall's number 7. So you've got Autzen up there at 4. You've got Washington number 2, Penn State number 1, Michigan number 3. It's quite the list. But you could also use this as a gauge, right? When you're trying to figure out what places do you want to go to this year or the next couple of years if you're a UCLA fan. Well, one, Penn State, that's got to be big. In my bucket list, if you're looking at the Big Ten stadium rankings, I do really want to go to Penn State. Now, UCLA's got quite the bucket list of games to go to this year, on the road specifically. You can go to Penn State. You can go to Nebraska if you didn't go in the last decade. Now, Nebraska was pretty good that past decade. That time, they obviously not national championship good, but decent. Now they've kind of faded, and they're trying to figure out, like UCLA, what this Big Ten life looks like. Nebraska years ahead of UCLA trying to figure that out. But for me, you can go to Penn State. You go to LSU, which is obviously not Big Ten. You can go to the likes of a Washington. You can go to Hawaii, Nebraska, Penn State. But those are some top-tier road games to go to this year. Well, I think a little differently about the Hawaii football complex, having seen it in person, but many people are going to want to go to Hawaii in August. Not a bad thing to do prior to Labor Day weekends. Yet here UCLA is almost every year in the Big Ten. You're going to go and find out that there's a top-tier road game or two to go to. And the better these teams get, right? Say Illinois gets rumbling, or Rutgers goes crazy, or we've even seen Purdue with the crazy stadium. That's the beauty of college football, at least maybe prior to the NIL days and age, when you could still bring a number 2 Ohio State team in or top-tier team into a Purdue or a Maryland, get a top crowd, get it rowdy, get it energized, and it is arguably the best atmosphere in college football ever. And you could say that week in and week out sometimes when you get the best environments. But, think about this list. UCLA doesn't even get to go to Michigan yet. They don't even get to go to Ohio State, which is only top 5. Going to Kinnick Stadium for Iowa, which is the new wave to the Children's Hospital after, I believe, the first quarter. You get to wave, and they wave back. That's one of the most beautiful scenes. They always post it on social media. I wonder, post in the comments, tell me what you think. What stadium, what atmosphere do you want to see UCLA, specifically in the Big Ten? Now, if you do think it's Washington, if you do think it's Oregon, whatever, throw it in there. But what place do you want to go to and figure it out and see, hey, what's the best place in the Big Ten? Now, I personally think a whiteout in Penn State, there's nothing like that. Of course, Michigan and Ohio State have some of the best venues as well, although we can't say too much nice things about anything where Chip Kelly's at. Jokes aside, I think UCLA, we're going to have a lot of fun road games. And most importantly, this is also a cry to the fans. Under Deshaun Foster, to be slapped in the face. This is written at the end of June. This is a week-old article as we begin the first week of July of 2024, where, yes, the clowning has always happened about the fickle fan base getting to the Rose Bowl. But we need to support UCLA. Showcase that even if Indiana's coming to town, which isn't certainly by any stretch of the imagination a big-time football Big Ten program, that UCLA can still pack the stadium. And I'm fairly confident that the stadium will be way more filled up than it was for Chip Kelly's opener. I remember Chip Kelly's opener when they played Cincinnati. Now, it was a little different because the attendance had dipped a little bit under Jim Moore. The team had struggled, and UCLA had to undergo a rebuild with Chip Kelly, as most teams tend to do, just pre-transfer portal era. That's the only thing. That was one of the big things that Chip Kelly couldn't do, which was revamp his roster right away. It took a few years. But the thing is now, UCLA with the portal can be fairly more competitive under a head coaching switch with Kelly bolting. And I think the Rose Bowl needs to be packed out for that opener against Indiana. Hopefully, they take care of business against Hawaii, which they should. Get a week off, then play that week 3 or week 2 game, but third week of playing games for UCLA. Get to 2-0 and beat Indiana. And prove that they're not the 13th best atmosphere in the Big Ten. They're sandwiched between Illinois and Rutgers and fairly close to Michigan State and Minnesota. And remember, when they put these atmospheres out there, remember in October or early November when it's cold at most of these places, yes, it can get kind of cold at the Rose Bowl. But if UCLA gets a day game, it ain't going to be snowing. Remember that. It ain't going to be ice cold at your football game later in the season, as it will be at almost all these venues. All right. Next, we're going to talk about UCLA Bruins and some positive updates for some players in the NBA, including one who we would have loved to see in a UCLA uniform one extra year. He couldn't, but he's probably going to make his NBA debut next year. Let's talk about that next. Well, now it's NBA Summer League season or Olympics season. Maybe it's both if you're a super crazy sports fan like I tend to be. I tend to pay less attention to the Summer League, although almost all the eyes, I promise you, all the eyes, all the highlights will be focused on Bronny James. Let's remember there's many more athletes than Bronny James. Even though I'm a Lakers fan myself, there's more than just Bronny James out there. Now let's talk about UCLA players working in the NBA. And now maybe you saw the video of Jrue Holiday with Jack Black. That was pretty funny, him wearing his like Tenacious D award or something for being so great on defense, unfortunately leading the Boston Celtics to the championship. But it led me to think I saw a couple of updates of UCLA Bruins in the news. So let's talk about a very good one. Remember Jalen Clark? It was that big debate after UCLA lost in the Sweet 16. What would UCLA do? Well, were they able to keep Jalen Clark? Could they have kept Adem Bona? Could they have kept Tiger Campbell or Jaime Jaquez Jr.? Because they all had their COVID years to use. And Jaquez was like, no, I'm going to be a first rounder. And lo and behold, Jaquez had a very successful campaign with the Heat. More on him in a moment. Tiger Campbell tested his waters and he went to the NBA. Wasn't an NBA player, but he definitely made his work known at UCLA. But the big questions were, would Adem Bona stay and Jalen Clark stay? They both were battling with injuries, one a shoulder rehabilitation, the other one an Achilles rupture, and Bona ended up staying, and he was very good. Then you had Jalen Clark, one of the two back-to-back Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year award winners for UCLA, him and Bona, the Naismith Award winner, the best defender in the country. And as much as we would have wanted UCLA to keep him, he didn't get cleared to play until July 2024. So we're finally going to get to see Jalen Clark play, hopefully in the Summer League, but he's cleared, and he's going to be able to find a way since that crushing Arizona game where if he wasn't hurt, UCLA probably makes a strong Final Four run. They probably get through at Gonzaga. They could have given, in my mind, UConn a run for their money, even if Bona was hurt, and probably would have won that Pac-12 tournament championship easily. They wouldn't have lost to Arizona in the 23 tournament championship for Pac-12 in Vegas. But the big glorious news is Jalen Clark is finally healthy, officially cleared for full contact 5-on-5 basketball activities. So it's been a long journey, closing in on a year and a half, maybe not exactly, but more to a year and a half than a year, right? Year and 3 months, year and 4 months between that game, him fighting. But his athletic ability, his defensive intangibles will be something Minnesota was missing. Remember that. That's a Minnesota team that's got Anthony Edwards, got a lot of teams. They talk about Gobert, who just won a Defensive Player of the Year award, whether you think AD should have won it or anybody else. Imagine having Clark as a defensive wing out there that people have probably forgotten. That's how much better Minnesota is going to be if Clark remains healthy and is as dominant as he was in college. He is a valuable bench piece for those Timberwolves, a team that was a number 1, 2, or 3 seed in the West, basically a 1 seed with how it all played out, how close it was in the standings at the end of the day. Now, remember, UCLA, they had Amari Bailey, who was another one of those youngsters, though, that was deciding stay or come back. Bailey had to go bounce around. Things didn't work as well in Charlotte. Charlotte got rid of him, and he actually signed a Summer League deal with the Clippers. So as much as all the eyes will be on Bronny James, you have to keep an eye out for the Clippers because Amari Bailey is on their Summer League team, and I wish he could have stayed one more year. If he stayed as a sophomore, he would have been the option. UCLA would have been force-feeding Adem Bona. You probably would have had a legitimate 18-point per game, arguably 20-point per game scorer if Bailey wanted to stay. Now, people don't want to stay in college and do classes. Bailey had probably seen what the NIL looked like, didn't think that would have stayed up. And remember, NIL didn't kick up last season. It kicked up the next season. So that big opportunity all probably went to Bona, wasn't good enough for the rest of the roster, and then kicked up when UCLA went to go into the portal this year with Men of Westwood and grew up with the donors through and through. So if Bailey was able to stay, think about if the UCLA NIL budget had been just a couple seasons sooner, where UCLA could have maybe gotten a Hunter Dickinson in the portal, maybe gotten a couple more talented players to make last year not so much of a dud, although that falls on Cronin, the players, and everybody else, as much as it does a little bit of the NIL budget. But you go back to Amari Bailey, could have kept him for this last season, and imagine in what was known as a probably very weak class, or next year too, he stays one more year. He's probably a first rounder as opposed to a second rounder getting cut and sticking with the Clippers. I think he's very talented, should keep playing and find, obviously, understatement of the year. But imagine sometimes the difference between sticking in college, which is the bona fide minor leagues of college basketball. I know there's the G League and all those things, but college basketball is as intense as it gets to grow and prepare yourself for the game of NBA basketball, let alone pro ball. It's very crucial to stick 1 to 2 to 3 years. And I wonder how that'll transition once the COVID era is officially done. Nobody gets to use their COVID years anymore. And there might be an extra red shirt people might be throwing around with their 10th year in injuries, as we see some cases happen. But I do think we might see a small shift back to a younger college basketball day and age. And I wonder if Amari Bailey would have, I'm fairly confident he would have benefited from another year. He was good. He's NBA solid, maybe not a starter at this day and age of his career, but I wish he would have stayed one more year and developed. Speaking of developing, you had Jaime Jaquez Jr. He's not going to be playing in the Summer League because he was named on the U.S. men's national team select team. I don't even fully know what that means. Obviously, he's not going to the Olympics, but he's on the Team USA select team. He's going to be going against Jrue Holiday, a couple of former Bruins, because he's on the U.S. team. You got the select team preparing for different things, but he's not going to be in the Summer League. So if you're like a Jaquez, if Mick Cronin's selling all these current Bruins, look at the stories between these different players. You can look at how you had Jalen Clark, senior year, buy high and recover in the NBA. That's what Clark decided to do, and he couldn't even play for UCLA. You had the Dembona, who was Pac-12 Freshman of the Year, then came back, won Defensive Player of the Year. He will be in the Summer League with the Sixers and is probably going to get the better of the contracts than most of the second rounders, because he is most likely to get some NBA minutes this year for the Sixers. He should. He's too freakishly athletic and so good defensively in his best days without fouling, then he should get some minutes. But if you look at, and you saw Dembona got a little higher. Now, if he stayed one more year, could have turned into a first year. Then you point to Bailey, freshman, who went 1 year, made some clutch shots. If UCLA beats Gonzaga, that Bailey 3 gets remembered more than that Julian Strother 3 by Gonzaga from half court. Wonder what that looks different. Then you've got Jaquez, who stays the 4 years, says, I'm not going to use that COVID year. I am high, coming off my stock's rising after the Conference Player of the Year award, took my team to a Final Four, made it to a Sweet 16, was the leading scorer, and he turned into a player that was ready to go in the NBA. And with a healthy Miami Heat team, certainly would have given the Boston Celtics a lot more run in the NBA playoffs. So now Mick Cronin can point to different cases. Guy coming back after injury, guys leaving after injury, freshman leaving, and a senior Jaquez, and the difference of success between all those guys. And now you can see, hey, if you want to be an NBA or maybe stay one more year, stick it out, grind it out, earn those minutes, as he can point to some of these players on this current team, like maybe Brandon Williams or the Stefanoviches, right? Or, Sebastian Mack's going to have to fight for some time. Everybody seems to have debate whether he was super injured or is going to lose time this year. Or is it going to be Sky Clark who's coming with, there's so many different ways people are going to be losing time, whether it's a newcomer to this team or a guy that played a pivotal role on last year's team with lots of minutes and scoring a lot of points. Mick Cronin's going to say, hey, look at these options. The guys who stuck it out had better opportunities in the NBA. And Jaquez, being a rising star with the Heat, sometimes it's a good fit too. But the guys who stuck it out the longest are having better, fulfilling NBA careers earlier. Not to say that Bailey can't. Not to say that Bona can't make an immediate impact if he hadn't stayed one more year. That's probably the case if you got a guy averaging a lot more points in a premier basketball conference like UCLA was and is now moving into. That's the big thing moving forward. And the big thing is you should download, subscribe, like the podcast, comment your thoughts. Thanks for your support. Get your hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA fight, fight, fights. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.